The roof beam cracked like a gunshot, sending Meridia Kestrel scrambling to shield her 5-year-old twins as chunks of rotted wood crashed down around them. Rain poured through the gaping hole, turning their already threadbare living room into a muddy disaster zone, Mama. Cassian cried, clinging to her soaked nightgown while his sister Lyra sobbed in terror. Meridia pulled both children against her chest, her heart breaking as she watched 28 years of dreams literally collapse. Around them, the old farmhouse had been her grandfather's pride, then her father's burden, and now her impossible nightmare. 3 months behind on taxes, no money for repairs, and winter approaching fast in the Colorado territory. "It's okay, babies," she whispered through her own tears, though nothing about their situation was okay. "We'll figure something out." Thunder crashed overhead as if the heavens themselves were mocking her empty promise. She had $37 to her name, 2 children depending on her, and now no roof over their heads. The bank notice tucked behind the loose kitchen floorboard gave her 2 weeks before foreclosure. That's when she heard the heavy boots on her collapsing front porch. "Ma'am, you folks all right in there?" The voice was deep, commanding, with the kind of authority that made grown men listen and wild horses calm. Meridia looked up through the rain streaming down her face to see the largest man she'd ever encountered filling her doorway, 6'6", of solid muscle wrapped in expensive leather and confidence. Garrison Thornfield had been riding back from checking his northern boundary when he'd seen the house literally falling apart in the storm. His first instinct had been to keep riding other people's problems weren't his concern, and he had enough troubles managing the largest cattle empire in 3 counties. But then he'd heard the children crying. The roof fit just gave way. Meridia managed, trying to maintain some dignity despite being soaked to the skin and surrounded by debris. Garrison took in the scene. With the calculating eye of a man accustomed to solving problems, the woman was young, maybe 12. With the kind of natural beauty that poverty couldn't diminish, born hair darkened by rain, green eyes bright with unshed tears, and a fierce protectiveness in the way she held her children that spoke of a lioness defending her cubs. The twins were identical boys with their mother's coloring, and the wide-eyed vulnerability that made something twist in his chest. He'd never wanted children himself, too much responsibility, too much potential for loss, but something about this broken family called 2 instincts he'd thought buried years ago. "This whole structure's compromised," he said, stepping carefully over fallen timbers. "It's not safe. You can't stay here." "We don't have anywhere else to go," Meridia admitted, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. Garrison studied her for a long moment, taking in the patched dress that had been mended too many times, the children's outgrown clothes, the desperate pride that kept her chin raised despite their circumstances. He recognized the look he'd worn it himself once, back when he was a dirt poor cowman, with nothing but determination and a willingness to work 18-hour days. "Let me fix everything," he said simply. The words hung in the storm-charged air, like a promise too good to be true. Meridia stared at him in shock, wondering if desperation had finally driven her to hallucinations. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I said let me fix everything. The house, the roof, whatever else needs doing." He gestured at the destruction around them with casual authority. "This place has good bones. It just needs someone with the resources to restore it properly." "Sir, I don't even know your name, and I certainly can't pay for Garrison Thornfield, and I'm not asking for payment." His steel blue eyes held, hers steadily at least, not the kind you're thinking of. Meridia's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard stories about men who preyed on desperate women, who offered help with strings attached that no decent mother could accept. But something in this stranger's face, a fundamental decency beneath the weathered exterior made her instincts say he was different. "What kind of payment, then?" she asked carefully. "Company. Conversation. Place to come where someone gives a damn whether I make it home safe each night." His voice roughened slightly. "I've got more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes, and no one to spend it on. You've got a family that needs help. Seems like we might be able to help each other." The proposition was so unexpected, so impossibly generous, that Meridia felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Why? Why would you do this for strangers?" Garrison was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the children who were watching him with the solemn attention that only 5-year-olds could muster. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain, because sometimes the universe gives you a chance to be the help you wished you'd had when you needed it most, and sometimes it's easier to fix other people's problems than your own. Meridia could respond. Another section of ceiling gave way, sending the twins scrambling behind her skirts with fresh cries of alarm. Garrison moved with surprising speed for such a large man, scooping up Cassian and Lyra as if they weighed nothing and carrying them toward the door. "Decision time, Mrs. Kestrel. Meridia Kestrel." She followed him onto the relatively safer porch, her bare feet splashing through puddles. "Mrs. Kestrel, this house is coming down whether we want it to or not. I can have my men here with supplies and equipment by tomorrow morning, but tonight you need somewhere dry and safe." He settled the twins gently on their feet, then fixed Meridia with that steady gaze. "My ranch is 5 miles north. Guest quarters are clean, warm, and ready for occupancy. I can't just move my children to a stranger's house." "Then don't think of me as a stranger. Think of me as the neighbor you haven't met yet." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Besides, my housekeeper Paloma would have my hide if she found out I left a family homeless in weather like this." As if summoned by his words, another beam crashed down inside the house, and Meridia made her decision. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Thornfield. Thank you, Just Garrison. And Mrs. Kestrel? Everything's going to be fine, I promise." As he helped load her few salvageable possessions into his wagon, Meridia found herself believing him. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of despair lifted slightly from her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, their luck was finally changing. The Thornfield ranch house rose from the valley floor like something out of a dream, its elegant proportions and welcoming lights making Meridia catch her breath in wonder. She'd expected a working ranch, functional buildings, and practical accommodations. What she found was a mansion that could have graced the finest neighborhoods in Denver or San Francisco. "Sweet, merciful heaven," she whispered as their wagon approached the circular drive. "Papa Garrison, do you live in a castle?" Cassian asked, his earlier fear forgotten in the face of such magnificence. Garrison glanced back at the boy with surprise. He'd somehow become Papa Garrison during the short ride from their collapsing home, though he couldn't remember either twin formally. Adopting the title? "Not a castle, son. It's just a house that got a little carried away with itself." The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a compact woman in her 50s with graying black hair and the kind of no-nonsense bearing that spoke of competence. An authority? Paloma Esperanza had been managing the Thornfield household for 12 years. And very little surprised her anymore until now. "Garrison Miguel Thornfield," she said, her slight Spanish accent adding warmth to the scolding tone. "What have you brought home this time?" "Neighbors in need, Paloma. Mrs. Kestrel and her boys lost their roof in the storm." He helped Meridia down from the wagon, his large hands careful and respectful. "They'll be staying in the Blue Guest Suite until we can get their place rebuilt." Paloma's sharp eyes took in the soggy family with the swift assessment of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. What she saw made her heart clench, a young mother trying desperately to maintain dignity in the face of disaster. And 2 little boys who looked like they'd been living on hope and determination for far too long. "Dios mío, you're soaked through. Come, Mios, let's get you warm and dry." She bustled toward them with maternal efficiency. The Blue Suite has a sitting room and 2 bedrooms perfect for a family. As they entered the house, Meridia fought not to gawk like a country cousin. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, oil paintings in gilt frames graced the walls, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. The casual wealth on display made her acutely conscious of her own shabby appearance. "This is Gata, this is—" "Too much," she murmured to Garrison. "Can't possibly stay somewhere so grand. Why not? The rooms are just sitting there empty otherwise." His tone suggested he genuinely couldn't understand her reluctance. "Paloma, they'll need clothes, something warm and dry while their things are being washed. Ready thinking ahead of you, patron." The housekeeper had somehow acquired armloads of blankets and what looked like children's nightclothes during her brief absence. "I keep extra things for emergencies." Within an hour, the twins were bathed, fed, and tucked into beds that probably Cost more than Meridia's entire wardrobe. They'd fallen asleep almost instantly, exhaustion finally overtaking the day's excitement and terror. Meridia herself had been provided with a simple but elegant dress in deep blue wool, along with undergarments, and slippers that fit as if made for her. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back lean, properly dressed, and looking less like a desperate pauper than she had in months. She found Garrison in his study, a masculine retreat filled with leather-bound books and the kind of solid furniture that suggested permanence and success. He'd changed from his rain-soaked clothes into clean trousers and a white shirt that emphasized his impressive shoulders. And he looked up from his paperwork as she entered. "Better?" he asked. "Much, thank you. Your housekeeper is an angel. She'll be pleased to hear that. Paloma doesn't take to everyone, but she's already adopted your boys." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit. We should talk about practical matters." Meridia settled into the chair, hyper-aware of the intimacy of being alone. "With him in the lamplight, about your offer to rebuild our house, I need you to understand that I can't pay you back. Not in money anyway. I told you, I'm not looking for money." "Then what are you looking for?" The question came out more direct than she'd intended. But she needed to understand his motivations before she let herself, her children become dependent on his generosity. Garrison was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the desk's leather surface. When he finally spoke, his voice held a vulnerability that surprised her. "Do you know what it's like to have everything a man could want and still feel like something's missing? I've built this empire, acquired more wealth than I can spend, gained the respect of every rancher from here to California. But at the end of the day, I come home to empty rooms and silence." "You never married?" "Came close once. Rebecca Fairmont, daughter of a railroad baron from Denver. We were engaged for 2 years." His mouth twisted with old bitterness. She liked the idea of marrying a successful rancher, thought it would be romantic, like something out of a dime novel. Reality was less appealing. "What happened?" She visited the ranch for a month before our wedding. By the end of the first week, she was complaining about the isolation, the lack of culture, the primitive conditions. By the end of the month, she'd decided that marriage to a cowboy, even a wealthy one, was beneath her social aspirations. That must have been devastating. "It was educational," he corrected. "Taught me the difference between someone who loves the idea of your life and someone who actually wants to share it." The distinction hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Meridia understood that he was testing her somehow, gauging whether she was another Rebecca Fairmont, looking for an easy escape from hardship. "Mr. Thornfield Garrison, I want you to know that I appreciate what you're doing more than I can express. But I won't let you rebuild our house out of pity, and I won't stay here as some kind of charity case. Then what will you let me do?" Question was asked with such genuine curiosity that Meridia found herself answering with complete honesty. "Let me earn it. Give me work, real work, not make-believe tasks designed to preserve my dignity. Let me contribute something meaningful to your operation while you rebuild our home." What kind of work? Manage correspondence? Organize systems? "I taught school for 3 years before the boys were born. I'm not afraid of hard work or complicated problems." Her chin lifted with the pride that had kept her going through the darkest months. "I won't be a kept woman, Garrison, not even a respectable one." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of respect for her stubborn independence. "All right," he said finally. "Fair enough. I've been needing someone to manage the business side of things. Anyway, Paloma handles the household, but ranch operations have gotten too complex for me to handle alone." "What would that involve?" "Everything from cattle sales to supply ordering, payroll management, to contract negotiations. The position would come with a salary commensurate with the responsibility." He named a figure that made her eyes widen. "Plus room and board for you and the boys until your house is ready." It was more than generous, it was transformative. For the first time in months, Meridia could see a path forward that didn't involve constant desperation and impossible choices. "I accept," she said simply. "Good." His smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him, and it transformed his. Weathered features entirely. We'll start tomorrow. Tonight, just rest and let yourself feel safe. Safe. The word hit her like a physical blow, reminding her how long it had been since she'd felt anything approaching security. As she made her way to the guest suite, Meridia found herself wondering if this was what answered prayers looked like, not angels and miracles, but a lonely cowboy with kind eyes and the resources to rebuild broken dreams. Dawn came with the sound of hammering and the cheerful chaos of workmen organizing supplies in the ranch yard. Meridia woke to find her twins already dressed and pressed against the window, watching the activity with wide-eyed fascination. "Mama, look! Papa Garrison brought an army," Lyra announced, bouncing on his toes with excitement. Through the window, Meridia could see at least 20 men loading wagons with lumber, tools, and building materials. At the center of it all, Garrison moved with calm authority, directing operations with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex projects. "He said he'd start today, but I didn't expect," she trailed off, overwhelmed by the scale of the operation. A soft knock interrupted her amazement. Paloma entered with a breakfast tray in her typical maternal efficiency. "The patron, he does nothing by half measures," the housekeeper explained, setting down plates of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits that made the boy's eyes light up with hunger. "When he decides to help someone, he helps completely." "It's too much," Meridia protested, though her stomach growled at the sight of more food than they'd seen in weeks. "I can't possibly accept this level of generosity." "Mia, you think this is charity?" Paloma's laugh was warm but knowing. "That man has been looking for a reason to care about something beyond cattle and profit margins for years. You and your boys, you give him purpose." After breakfast, Meridia made her way to the study where Garrison had promised to show her the ranch's business operations. What she found was organized chaos ledgers stacked everywhere, correspondence scattered across multiple surfaces, and financial documents that suggested an empire far more complex than she'd imagined. "Sweet mercy," she breathed, taking in the scope of the mess. "How do you keep track of anything?" "Mostly I don't." Garrison looked up from a stack of cattle purchase orders with rueful acknowledgement of the chaos. "I'm good at the ranching part, breeding, grazing, market timing. The paperwork side has gotten away from me." Meridia moved to the nearest stack of documents, her trained eye already identifying patterns and priorities. "These are all from the same supplier, but scattered across 6 months of correspondence. In this," she held up a contract, "this price for feed grain is 20% higher than market rate. Is it?" He moved to look over her shoulder, and she was suddenly aware of his height, his warmth, the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to surround him. "I've been dealing with Patterson Feed for 8 years. Never thought to question their prices. Loyalty is admirable, but business is business." Her voice was slightly breathless from his proximity, but she forced herself to focus on the numbers. "If you're buying in the volumes I see here, you should be getting bulk discounts, not premium rates." For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side organizing his business affairs. Meridia found herself increasingly impressed by the scope of Garrison's operations. He wasn't just running a ranch. He was managing a diversified agricultural empire that included cattle, horses, grain production, and even some mining interests. "You're not just a cowboy," she said finally, leaning back in her chair with newfound respect. "You're an industrialist. I'm a man who learned early that the only security in this world is what you build with your own hands." His voice carried the weight of old struggles, started with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. "What happened to your family?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, too personal for their new working relationship. But something in his expression made her hold her breath, waiting for his answer. "Parents died when I was 16. Cholera outbreak that took half the county." His hands stilled on the papers he'd been sorting. "Left me with a failing homestead and enough debt to bury 3 families. How did you survive?" "Sold everything. Worked as a cowhand for other ranchers. Saved every penny for 5 years, until I could buy my first 100 acres. He gestured toward the window that showed his vast holdings. "Built it piece by piece, season by season, year by year. Understood then why he'd stopped to help. He recognized the desperation in her eyes, because he'd lived it himself. The connection between them wasn't just attraction or convenience, it was recognition of shared struggle. "The boys want to help with the house reconstruction," she said, changing the subject before the moment became too intimate. Cassian asked if he could carry nails. Garrison's face softened at the mention of her sons. "They can help. Children should understand that homes don't just appear, they're built through effort and care." That afternoon, Meridia watched from the ranch office window as her twins helped with the construction work. Both boys had been given small tasks appropriate to their age, sorting nails, carrying water to the workers, sweeping up debris, but it was their interaction with Garrison that made her heart clench with unexpected emotion. The big rancher treated them with patient seriousness, listening to their chatter, answering their questions, and most importantly, making them feel useful and valued. When Lyra proudly showed him a nail he'd sorted, Garrison examined it with the gravity of a foreman inspecting critical work. "Perfect classification," he told the boy solemnly. "This house is going to be solid because of work like this." Watching them together, Meridia felt something shift in her chest, a warmth. That had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with possibilities she hadn't dared consider. Her boys had never known their father, who died in a logging accident before they were born. But here was a man who seemed naturally suited to filling that void. "They like him," Paloma observed, appearing beside her with afternoon coffee. "Yes, they do. And you? Do you like him too?" The direct question made Meridia flush. "He's been very kind to us." "That's not what I asked, Mia." Meridia was quiet for a moment, watching Garrison hoist Cassian onto his shoulders so the boy could see, the roof frame taking shape. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. 3 days ago, we were homeless and desperate. Now we're living in luxury, while a virtual stranger rebuilds our entire life. Maybe you're supposed to feel grateful. Maybe you're supposed to feel hopeful." Paloma's voice was gentle but knowing. "Or maybe you're supposed to feel like a woman who's caught the attention of a good man." That evening, after the twins were in bed and the construction crew had departed, Meridia found herself on the ranch house's front porch with Garrison. Dea sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain air. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything you're doing, the house, the job, the kindness to my boys. I know you don't need my gratitude, but I need to give it. You don't owe me anything, Meridia, don't I?" She turned to face him in the darkness. "You've changed our entire world in the span of a few days. If that doesn't create obligation, what does? It creates opportunity," he said carefully. "For both of us." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Meridia understood that they were approaching a crossroads, the place where gratitude might transform into something deeper, more dangerous, infinitely more precious. "What kind of opportunity?" she whispered, instead of answering with words. Garrison reached out to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. The gesture was tentative, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't single. When he kissed her, it was with the careful reverence of a man who understood the gift he was being offered. And when she kissed him back, it was with the tentative hope of a woman learning to trust in possibility again. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a sweating rider who'd pushed his horse hard from town. Meridia was in the office, reviewing supply contracts when Paloma burst through the door, her usual composure shattered. "Mia, there's trouble," the housekeeper said, pressing the official document into Meridia's hands with shaking fingers. From the territorial court, Meridia's blood turned to ice as she read the legal language. Her late husband's brother, Cornelius Kestrel, was claiming custody of the twins based on moral unfitness of their mother and improper living arrangements with an unmarried man. "No," she breathed, the paper fluttering to the floor as her legs gave way. "No, no, no." She'd fled to Colorado territory specifically to escape Cornelius and his wife Agatha, who'd made it clear they considered her an unfit guardian for valuable children who stood to inherit the Kestrel shipping fortune when they came of age. The fact that there was no fortune, that her deceased husband had been the black sheep son who'd been cut off years ago, was apparently irrelevant to his brother's schemes. Garrison found her 20 minutes later, still sitting on the office floor with tears streaming down her face while the legal summons lay scattered around her like fallen leaves. What happened? He knelt beside her, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. They want my babies, she sobbed, unable to maintain her composure in the face of losing everything that mattered. My husband's brother, he's filed for custody. Claims I'm an unfit mother because I'm living here with you. Garrison's jaw tightened as he read the documents, his expression growing darker with each legal phrase. Cornelius Kestrel of Boston says here he's a shipping magnate with proper resources to raise the children. He's a monster who sees dollar signs when he looks at my boys. Meridia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to regain some control. He thinks there's inheritance money coming to them, money that doesn't exist in. He wants control of it. Because Charles, my husband, never told his family about being disinherited, let them think he was. Still the favored son, instead of admitting he'd been cut off for marrying beneath his station, her voice turned bitter. Now Cornelius thinks the twins are his ticket to claiming Charles's non-existent inheritance. Garrison was quiet for a moment, studying the legal papers with the intensity of a general planning for war. This says you have 30 days to appear in territorial court with the children. I can't fight him. Look at this. She pointed to the list of character witnesses Cornelius had assembled. Half the Boston Social Register ready to testify that. I'm a gold-digging harlot who's abandoned moral propriety. What witnesses do you have? Me. Just me.
Act bitterly.
A penniless widow living unmarried with a man who's not her husband. Even if I could afford lawyers, what defense could I possibly mount? Garrison stood abruptly, his expression shifting into something cold and determined. Stay here with the boys. I need to ride to town. Where are you going? To send some telegrams. And to have a conversation with Judge Morrison about territorial custody law. He was gone for 6 hours, returning just as the twins were being tucked into bed. Meridia had spent the day in alternating waves of panic and desperate planning, trying to figure out how to disappear with her children before the court date. Pack light, she told them after their bedtime story. We might be taking a trip soon. Where are we going, Mama? Cassian asked sleepily. I don't know yet, sweetheart. We'll be together, no matter what. She found Garrison in his study, surrounded by telegrams and legal documents. His expression was grim but not defeated, which gave her the first flicker of hope she'd felt. All day? Well, she asked. I've been in contact with a legal firm in Denver, the best family law attorneys in the territory. They're willing to take your case. I can't afford lawyers, Garrison. Barely have enough money for train tickets. We need to run. You're not running anywhere. His voice carried absolute conviction. And you're not facing this alone. Something in his tone made her heart flutter with dangerous hope. What do you mean? Instead of answering, he stood and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as if they held answers to impossible questions. There's a simple solution to this legal problem. What kind of solution? He turned to face her, and she saw vulnerability beneath his usual confidence. Marry me. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Marry me, Meridia? Tomorrow, if possible. Make this arrangement legal and permanent. He moved toward her with careful steps. Eliminates their primary argument that you're living in moral impropriety. It gives you the protection of my name and resources. Most importantly, it gives the boys a legal father who can fight for them. Garrison, you can't possibly want to marry me just to solve a custody dispute, can't I? His steel blue eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. What if I told you I've been thinking about marriage since that first night when I found you in the rain? What if this legal challenge is just forcing me to speak feelings I've been too much of a coward to voice? Her heart hammered against her ribs as she processed his words. You're talking about a marriage of convenience to help my legal situation? I'm talking about a marriage because I've fallen in love with you. The confession came out rough, as if the words had been dragged from some deep place he'd kept locked. Because I love the way you make those boys feel safe and valued. I love watching you turn chaos into order. Because when I imagine my future, you're the only woman I can see sharing it. Tears sprang to her eyes as the full weight of his declaration hit her. Garrison, I know it's too fast. I know you're still figuring out what you feel, but marry me anyway, Meridia.
Yes.
Give us time to grow into something real while we fight to keep your children where they belong. The proposal was everything she'd never dared dream of: protection, partnership, and the promise of love from a man who'd already proven his worth through actions rather than words. But it was also terrifying in its implications. What if it doesn't work? What if we marry for practical reasons and end up miserable? Then we'll be miserable together instead of apart. His mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. I don't think that's going to happen. Do you? Looking into his eyes, feeling the pull of attraction that had been growing stronger each day, Meridia realized he was right. What she felt for Garrison had already moved beyond gratitude into something deeper, more dangerous, infinitely more precious. The boys barely know you, she said weakly. The boys call me Papa Garrison and fight over who gets to help me with chores. They know me well enough. People will say I trapped you, that I used my children to manipulate a wealthy man into marriage. People can say whatever they want. I know the truth, and so do you. He reached out to cup her face in his large hands. Meridia, I'm not asking you to love me yet. I'm asking you to give us the chance to build something worth having. The kiss that followed was gentle but sure, tasting of promises and possibility. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. Tomorrow? Tomorrow? As he held her close, Meridia felt the last of her reserves crumble. She was stepping into the unknown, but she wasn't stepping alone. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as husband and wife, as partners. As the family they'd chosen to become, the wedding took place at sunrise the next morning, in Judge Morrison's private chambers, witnessed by Paloma and the judge's clerk. Meridia wore her one good dress, the blue wool Garrison had given her, while he stood beside her in his finest suit, looking like he'd rather face a stampeding herd than speak vows in front of witnesses. But when the judge asked if he took Meridia to be his lawfully wedded wife, his voice was steady and sure. I do. And when her turn came, she found herself meaning the words more than she'd expected. I do. The kiss that sealed their union was brief but sweet, witnessed by the Colorado sunrise streaming through tall windows. They were legally wed, now bound by territorial law and something deeper, a growing affection that promised to bloom into love given time and care. Congratulations, Mrs. Thornfield, Judge Morrison said with a smile. Mr. Thornfield, you're a lucky man. Yes, sir, I am. They returned to the ranch to find the twins awake and demanding explanations for the adult's mysterious early morning absence. Cassian took the news of the marriage with the practical acceptance of childhood. Does this mean Papa Garrison is really our papa now? He asked. If that's what you'd like, Meridia replied carefully. Can we live here forever? Would you like that? No. Both boys nodded emphatically, and Garrison felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. He'd worried that the sudden marriage might confuse or frighten them, but they seemed to view it as the natural progression of events. Then yes, he said, kneeling to their eye level. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. The celebration was interrupted by the arrival of another dust-covered rider bearing telegrams from Denver. The legal team Garrison had hired was working around the clock to prepare their defense. But the news wasn't entirely encouraging. Cornelius Kestrel has significant influence in territorial courts, Meridia read from the lawyer's wire. His claims of moral unfitness may carry weight despite the marriage. What does that mean? Garrison asked. It means marrying me might not be enough. She sank into a chair, the weight of renewed fear settling on her shoulders. He's arguing that my previous behavior living here, unmarried, demonstrates a pattern of poor judgment that marriage can't erase. That's ridiculous. That's legal strategy. She looked up at him with eyes shadowed by despair. Garrison, what if we lose? What if I have to watch my children disappear into that monster's custody because I made choices born of desperation? Instead of answering immediately, he pulled her to her feet and into his arms. The embrace was warm, solid, reassuring in its promise of unconditional support. We're not going to lose, he said firmly, because I have resources Cornelius Kestrel doesn't know about, and I'm not above using every one of them. That afternoon, Garrison closeted himself in his study, with stacks of correspondence, and the telegraph operator practically living in his front yard. Messages flew back and forth between the ranch and destinations across the territory: Denver, Colorado Springs, even as far as San Francisco and Chicago. "What's he doing?" Meridia asked Paloma as they watched another telegram arrive. "What he always does when something matters to him," the housekeeper replied. "Everything possible, and then some." The answer came the next morning in the form of an unexpected visitor: Territorial Governor Samuel Crawford himself, accompanied by his wife and a small entourage. The governor was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s who carried himself with the easy authority of someone accustomed to wielding power. "Garrison," Crawford called as he dismounted from his horse. "Got your telegram? Thought this situation warranted a personal visit." Meridia watched in amazement as her new husband greeted the territorial governor like an old friend. The easy familiarity between them spoke of a relationship that went far deeper than casual acquaintance. "Samuel, thank you for coming. I know how busy you are with statehood preparations." "Never too busy for the man who financed half my campaign," the governor replied with a grin. "Besides, Margaret's been wanting to see your famous ranch." Over dinner that evening, the full scope of Garrison's influence became clear. He wasn't just a successful rancher, he was a kingmaker who'd helped fund Crawford's rise to power. A man whose opinion carried weight in territorial politics, and whose support could make or break careers. "Tell me about this custody situation," Crawford said over brandy in the study. "Your telegram suggested some irregularities in the proceedings." Garrison laid out the facts with methodical precision. Cornelius Kestrel's transparent money grab, the questionable legal basis for his claims, the obvious attempt to use territorial courts to circumvent proper jurisdiction. "The man's not even a territorial resident," Crawford observed. "What standing does he have to petition our courts?" "That's what I'd like to know," Garrison replied. "Seems to me this whole case should be dismissed for lack of proper jurisdiction." "Seems to me you're right." The governor's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'll have a word with Judge Morrison tomorrow. Make sure he understands the territorial government's position on frivolous custody challenges." Meridia felt a flicker of unease at the casual discussion of political pressure. "Governor Crawford, I appreciate your support, but I don't want to win through political manipulation. The law says Cornelius has a valid claim, Mrs. Thornfield," Crawford interrupted gently. "The law says a great many things, but it also requires proper interpretation. Your brother-in-law is attempting to use our territorial courts to settle what amounts to a family dispute originating in Massachusetts. That's not justice, that's forum shopping." "Besides," Garrison added, "you have character witnesses who can speak to your fitness as a mother. People whose word carries considerable weight in this territory." "What people?" Our question was answered over the next 3 days as a parade of visitors arrived at the ranch. Business partners who dealt with Garrison for years and observed his transformation since meeting Meridia. Neighbors who'd watched her interaction with the twins and seen nothing but devoted motherhood. Even some of the construction workers who'd rebuilt her house testified to her hands, involvement, and obvious love for her children. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source: Dr. Helena Westbrook, the territory's first female physician, and a woman whose professional opinion carried enormous weight in matters involving children's welfare. "I've observed Mrs. Thornfield with her sons on multiple occasions," Dr. Westbrook stated in her formal deposition. "Her devotion to their physical and emotional well-being is exemplary. The children show no signs of neglect, abuse, or emotional distress. Indeed, they appear to be thriving under her care." "What about the allegations of moral impropriety?" asked the court recorder. "Living arrangements born of necessity and resolved through proper marriage hardly constitute moral failing," Dr. Westbrook replied crisply. "If we're to condemn every widow who's faced desperate circumstances, we'll have precious few mothers left in this territory." As the court date approached, Meridia found herself cautiously optimistic for the first time since receiving the custody summons. The legal team Garrison had assembled was formidable. Their case was solid. They had support from the highest levels of territorial government, but she also found herself grappling with more personal concerns. Their marriage might have begun. as a practical solution to a legal problem, but spending days in close proximity had awakened feelings that complicated everything. "You don't have to keep sleeping in the guest room," she told Garrison one evening as they reviewed legal documents together. "We're married now. People can expect whatever they want," he replied, though she caught the flash of longing in his eyes. "When you come to my bed, it'll be because you want to, not because you feel obligated." The consideration behind his words made her heart flutter with something warmer than gratitude. This man who could command governors and reshape legal proceedings was treating her courtship like the delicate, precious thing it was. "What if I want to now?" she whispered. The question hung between them like a challenge and a promise. When he reached for her, it was with the reverent care of a man who understood the gift he was being offered. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, she kissed him soft and sweet and full of the growing love that surprised her with its intensity. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I'm sure," she said against his lips. "I'm sure about Olive. It's the marriage, the future, the chance we're taking on each other, even if we lose the custody case, especially if we lose the custody case. If the worst happens, I want to face it as your real wife, not just a legal convenience." The kiss that followed was deeper, hungrier, full of promises that had nothing to do with custody battles and everything to do with the love growing between them, like wildflowers after rain, inspected, resilient, and absolutely real. The territorial courthouse in Denver buzzed with tension as the custody hearing commenced. Cornelius Kestrel had arrived with an entourage that looked more like an invasion force, 3 expensive lawyers from Boston, a parade of character witnesses dressed in their finest clothes, and enough legal documents to stock a library. Meridia sat beside Garrison at the defendant's table, her hand clasped tightly in his as they faced the man who threatened to tear their newly formed family apart. Cornelius was exactly what she'd expected, soft and pale from years of comfortable living, with cold eyes that calculated the monetary value of everything they touched. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Morrison," the bailiff announced. "Judge." Morrison entered with the grave dignity of a man who understood the weight of the decision before him. His eyes swept the packed courtroom, taking in the obvious disparity between the parties. Cornelius's Boston lawyers in their expensive suits versus the territory's homegrown legal team. "This court will hear the matter of Kestrel versus Thornfield," the judge announced. "Counselors, present your opening arguments." Cornelius's lead attorney, a silver-haired shark named Pemberton Blackwell, rose with theatrical precision. He painted a picture of Meridia as a desperate woman who'd abandoned moral propriety for financial security, living in sin with a stranger while exposing innocent children to corrupting influences. "My client seeks only to provide his nephews with the advantages of proper breeding, education, and social standing," Blackwell declared. "The boy's father came from one of Boston's finest families. He deserved better than to be raised in primitive frontier conditions by a mother who has demonstrated questionable judgment in her personal affairs." When the territory's attorney, Victoria Sterling, rose to present their defense, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. Sterling was young for such a high-profile case, but she moved with the confidence of someone who held all the winning cards. "Your Honor, this case represents a shameful attempt to use our territorial courts to legitimize what amounts to kidnapping," she began. "Mr. Cornelius Kestrel has no legal standing in Colorado territory, no relationship with these children, and no legitimate claim to custody beyond naked greed." She methodically dismantled Cornelius's case, pointing out that he'd never met the twins, had no knowledge of their needs or personalities, and was motivated purely by mistaken beliefs about non-existent inheritance money. "Furthermore, Your Honor, the defendant has demonstrated exemplary motherhood under the most challenging circumstances. When faced with homelessness and poverty, she maintained her children's safety and well-being. When offered assistance, she insisted on earning her place rather than accepting charity. When threatened with separation from her sons, she made the difficult but responsible choice to enter into marriage with a man of impeccable character." The testimony that followed painted 2 very different pictures of the situation. Cornelius's witnesses spoke in abstract terms about proper upbringing and social advantages, while Meridia's supporters testified from direct observation about her devotion to her. Children, Dr. Westbrook's testimony was particularly devastating to Cornelius's case. "I've examined these children thoroughly," she stated. "They show every sign of being loved, nurtured, and properly cared for. Their physical health is excellent, their emotional development is normal, and their attachment to their mother is exactly what we'd expect from a secure, loving relationship." "What about their attachment to Mr. Thornfield?" Blackwell asked during cross-examination. "Remarkably healthy, considering the short duration of their acquaintance. The children clearly view him as a protective father figure, and he responds to them with genuine affection and patience." But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, the twins themselves. Judge Morrison had arranged for a private interview in his chambers. The court reporter read their responses aloud to the assembled parties. When asked about living at the ranch, Cassian had apparently said, "It's the best home we ever had. Mama doesn't cry anymore, and Papa Garrison teaches us important stuff like how to take care of horses." Lyra's contribution was even more direct. "Why would we want to live with scary Uncle Cornelius? We don't even know him, and he never sent us birthday presents or anything." When asked what they wanted most, both boys had given the same answer: "We want to stay with Mama and Papa Garrison forever." The judge's decision, when it came, was swift and definitive. "This court finds no merit in the plaintiff's custody petition," Judge Morrison declared. "The children in question are thriving under their mother's care, have formed healthy attachments to their stepfather, and have clearly expressed their own preferences regarding custody. Furthermore, this court questions whether proper jurisdiction exists for a Massachusetts resident to petition Colorado territorial courts regarding children who are legal residents of this territory." Cornelius's face went purple with rage as the implications sank in. "This is outrageous. Those children are Kestrels. They belong with their proper family." "Mr. Kestrel," Judge Morrison said coldly, "those children belong with their mother, who's demonstrated nothing but devotion to their welfare. Your petition is denied, and I'm ordering you to pay court costs for this frivolous proceeding." As the gavel fell, ending the threat that had hung over their family, Meridia felt Garrison's arm tighten around her waist. They'd won not just the legal battle, but the right to build their future without looking over their shoulders. "It's over," she whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "No," Garrison corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "Now it begins." That evening, back at the ranch, they celebrated with a dinner that felt more like a wedding reception than a legal victory. Mama had outdone herself with a feast that could have fed half the territory, while the twins regaled everyone with detailed accounts of their adventure in the big city. "Judge Morrison was nice," Cassian declared around a mouthful of cake. "He asked us lots of questions and wrote down our answers with a special pen." "Did you tell him the truth?" Garrison asked. "Of course. We did. We said we love living here and we don't want to go anywhere else ever." "And we said you're the best papa ever," Lyra added, making Garrison's eyes suspiciously bright. Later that night, after the twins were in bed and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Meridia found herself on the front porch with her husband, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain air. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything: the house, the marriage, the legal fight. You saved us." "We saved each other," he corrected, pulling her closer against his side. "You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. What's that? A reason to come home?" "Something worth protecting. A future that means more than just accumulating wealth." She turned in his arms to study his face in the starlight. "Do you regret it, marrying a woman with so much baggage? I regret waiting so long to find you." He said, his voice heavy with sincerity. "But I don't regret a single moment since." The kiss that followed was deep and sweet, tasting of promises kept and futures yet to be written. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Mrs. Thornfield," he murmured against her lips, "I love you." "I love you too, Mr. Thornfield," she whispered back, marveling at how icily the words came. "All of you, the strength, the gentleness, the way you love my boys like they were your own. They are my own. We're family now, Meridia. All of us, for better or worse." "For better," she said firmly. "Definitely for better." As they made their way inside together, Meridia felt the last of her fears fade away. They'd face the worst that could threaten their happiness and emerge stronger for it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them together as husband and wife, as partners, as the family they'd chosen to become, against all odds. 2 years later, sound of children's laughter filled the newly expanded ranch house. As 7-year-old Cassian and Lyra raced through the halls, chasing their baby sister, who was just learning to walk with determined, wobbly steps, careful with Rosalind. Meridia called from the kitchen, though her voice held more amusement than concern. At 27, she glowed with the contentment of a woman who'd found her place in the world. Garrison appeared in the doorway. Their 15-month-old daughter perched on his massive shoulders like a tiny queen surveying her domain. Rosalind had inherited her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination, creating a combination that kept the entire household on their toes. "The Denver delegation is here," he announced, settling Rosalind into her high chair. "Governor Crawford brought the railroad investors you wanted to meet." Meridia wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, automatically checking her appearance. In the mirror, the woman looking back bore little resemblance to the desperate widow who'd been rescued from a collapsing house 3 years ago. Success and love had transformed her into someone radiant with confidence and purpose. "Are you ready for this?" Garrison asked, noting her nervous energy. "As ready as anyone can be to propose revolutionizing territorial commerce," she replied with a grin that mixed excitement with trepidation. The Thornfield Ranch had prospered. Beyond anyone's dreams under their joint management, Meridia's business acumen combined with Garrison's ranching expertise had created an agricultural empire that supplied beef to markets from Denver to San Francisco. But her latest project was even more ambitious, a plan to establish Colorado Territory as the primary cattle supplier for the entire Western Railroad network. "Gentlemen," she said as they entered the dining room where Governor Crawford waited with 3 distinguished visitors, "thank you for making the journey to hear our proposal." The presentation that followed was masterful, combining detailed financial projections with practical logistics and visionary scope. Meridia had spent months researching railroad expansion plans, calculating shipping costs and developing contracts that would benefit everyone involved. "Mrs. Thornfield," said railroad magnate Harrison Westbridge when she finished, "this is the most comprehensive agricultural development plan I've ever seen. You're proposing to coordinate cattle operations across 3 territories to ensure steady supply for our western expansion?" "Exactly. Instead of each ranch negotiating separately with multiple buyers, we create a cooperative system that guarantees consistent quality and delivery schedules while maximizing profits for everyone involved." "And you believe you can convince other ranchers to participate?" Garrison leaned forward, his presence adding weight to their proposal. "Mrs. Thornfield has already secured preliminary agreements from 15 major operations across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana territories. When word spreads about the profit margins we're offering, we'll have more participants than we can handle." The negotiations that followed lasted 3 days, but when the railroad delegation departed, they carried signed contracts worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. The Thornfield Ranch would serve as headquarters for the new Western Cattle Cooperative, making them not just successful ranchers, but kingmakers in the emerging Western economy. "You did it," Garrison said that evening, as they watched the delegation's carriages disappear over the horizon. "You've just changed the future of ranching in the American West." "We did it," she corrected, leaning into his warmth. "None of this would have been possible without your reputation, your connections, your willingness to risk everything on my ideas. Best investment I ever made," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Their conversation was interrupted by the thunder of small feet as the twins burst onto the porch, followed more sedately by Paloma carrying Rosalind. "Papa, Mama," Cassian announced breathlessly. "We saw riders coming up the valley road." The approaching party turned out to be unexpected but welcome visitors, Dr. Helena Westbrook and her husband, accompanied by a young couple who looked nervous but hopeful. "Helena," Meridia exclaimed, embracing her friend warmly. "What brings you to our corner of paradise?" "Business, actually. I'd like you to meet Jonathan and Rebecca Morrison. They're newlyweds, looking to start their own ranch operation. Dr. Westbrook's eyes twinkled with mischief. I thought they might benefit from learning how it's really done. The Morrisons were exactly what Meridia and Garrison had once been: young, determined, in facing obstacles that seemed insurmountable without help. Jonathan had been a cavalry officer before his discharge, while Rebecca possessed teaching credentials, and a fierce intelligence that reminded Meridia of her younger self. We don't have much capital, Jonathan admitted over dinner.
Ow!
But we're willing to work harder than anyone else, and we learn fast. Those are the only qualifications that really matter, Garrison replied. Everything else can be taught. What followed was a conversation that stretched long into the night, covering everything from cattle breeding to business management to the challenges of building something lasting in frontier territory. By dawn, the Thornfields had gained new partners, and the Morrisons had found mentors who understood their dreams. We'll provide startup capital and guidance, Meridia explained as they toured the ranch operations the next morning. In return, your operation becomes part of our cooperative network, which guarantees markets for your cattle and ensures everyone's success. It was a pattern they would repeat many times over the coming years, identifying promising young families and helping them establish successful ranches throughout the territory. The Thornfield Empire grew not through conquest, but through partnership, creating a network of interconnected operations that dominated Western agriculture. 5 years after their wedding, as Colorado Territory prepared for statehood, Meridia stood on their front porch watching her children play in the yard. The twins, now 10 years old and confident in their riding skills, teaching 3-year-old Rosalind how to rope a patient old gelding, while baby Marcus, just 6 months old, slept peacefully in her arms. Any regrets? Garrison asked, joining her with the easy familiarity of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. Only that we waited so long to find each other, she replied. The same answer she'd given to the same question countless times over the years. Think the children will want to continue what we've built. Look at them, she said, nodding toward the yard where Cassian was patiently adjusting Rosalind's grip on her tiny rope. They're natural leaders, just like their father. Whatever they choose to do, they'll do it with integrity and purpose. If they choose something completely different, then we'll support them completely, just like you supported me when I proposed revolutionizing the cattle industry. Garrison chuckled, remembering that first ambitious presentation. You were terrifying, that day, all fierce intelligence and absolute conviction. I knew right then that I'd married someone extraordinary. You married someone desperate who got lucky, she corrected with a smile. I married the woman who was brave enough to accept help when it was offered, smart enough to turn opportunity into empire, and generous enough to share our success with others who needed the same chance we got. As the sun set behind the mountains that had sheltered their love story, Meridia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had begun with a roof caving in, a life falling apart, children crying in the rain. But from that destruction had grown something more beautiful than she'd ever dared dream. The Thornfield Ranch sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom, but its real wealth wasn't measured in acres or cattle. It was measured in love shared, opportunities created, and the knowledge that some promises, like the one Garrison had made in a storm-damaged house years ago, were worth keeping forever. Let me fix everything, he'd said that first night. And somehow, impossibly, he had. But the truth she'd learned in the years since was even more precious. They'd fixed each other, one day at a time, one challenge at a time, until the broken pieces of their separate pasts had become the foundation for a future neither could have built alone, as they made their way inside to tuck their children into bed. Meridia felt the same sense of completion she experienced every evening, the deep satisfaction of a day well lived, a love well tended, and a family grown strong in the shelter of the mountains and the certainty of their commitment to each other. The house that had once been falling down now stood solid and sure, filled with laughter and love and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come.